I absolutely love working in watercolour on canvas. I love the fact there's no glass in the way. I love the fact that I don't need to frame it. Whoops, hitting things, unless I want to. I love the fact that I can paint a metre by metre watercolour if I want to, or something smaller. I love the fact that I can correct mistakes. I can lift colour off really easily because I make mistakes. But what I don't like is that if I'm working in layers, the paint lifts incredibly easily and I can really muddy up and muck up the bottom layers. That I don't like. So I have come up with some ways of fixing those layers so that we can carry on glazing on canvas. So my name's Liz Chadderton. I'm a professional watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and I'm author of Painting Watercolours on Canvas, which is available from Crowwood Press. Every week I bring you a tip, trick or technique that I wish someone had told me about ages ago. And this week it's all about how to layer our colour on canvas without lifting up those first layers. If we take a quick look at this little nest painting, I hope you can see all the marks and the texture I've tried to achieve with the twigs and the fiddly bits around here. I did that by doing a layer, then masking, then another layer, then masking, then another layer, then masking, and then wiping all the masking fluid off. And there is no way I could do that on canvas without fixing the layers in some way. Even the masking fluid would pull the colour off the canvas, let alone when I was painting in quite loose washy layers over each other. So we really need to fix this problem. Let's look at the problem and see what some of the possible solutions are. So this is a board rather than canvas, but I prepared it with 3 layers of watercolour ground, just as if I was painting on canvas. It's actually a bit of old mount board, and it just makes it a lot easier to store samples and experiments rather than you know, having canvases with all these on. And it's a lot cheaper. This is phthalo blue and I put 4 swatches. I have done nothing with this one. We're going to have a go at using a workable fixative here, transparent water ground there, and I have painted this one with Aquafix in it to show you the difference. This is just a wet brush, and if I do a couple of strokes there, lift away, you can see how much of that paint I've lifted away. Now phthalo blue is usually a super staining colour that's really hard to lift if you're on watercolour paper. So, that's brilliant. You've made a mistake in your phthalo blue. You could just lift a little bit off, or even better, you could use some magic eraser, which you can just get from the cleaning aisle. You wet it, squeeze it till it's just damp, and then you could lift pretty much back to the white of the surface. And again, there is no way you could do that on paper without damaging the surface and without there still being some staining. So that's absolutely fabulous. And you think, wow, I can make mistakes, I can sort things out. But, as with every other upside, there's a downside. So let's just mix up a little bit of colour. If I now wanted to layer, well, it's not too bad. I'm not picking up too much of that colour because it's really dry, and I was sort of trying to be as light-handed as possible. So, you know, that's not too bad. But the big danger is that it dissolves the first layer and that will spread into the wash. It was so easy to lift. It makes getting clear colours and it all not mushing into one really tricky. So I reckon there's probably 3 options for trying to sort of fix our watercolour so that we don't do that. Of course, you could just paint in one layer and being really direct, which is what I usually do. But if you want layers, you could use a workable fixative. Now this is Krylon. Fixative is like a varnish, it sorts it out, but it is workable, so you can still work on top of it. Allegedly, you could work on top of it with dry medium, but will it just repel watercolour? A lot of people in the US like Krylon and really rave about it. It's hard to get in the UK. So a friend of mine went to New York and I said, "Oh, I know you're on holiday, but can you possibly find me a tin of this?" And she sort of smuggled it back into the country. So you have to shake it and then spray it. And now we have to wait for 10 to 15 minutes, and it smells, you can't smell it, luckily, disgusting. So let's write a few of these downsides. I'm going to say layers lift is that downside. So waiting, oh dear, I've got fixative everywhere. Well, right, 10 to 15 minutes. It's funny to write on because it's wet, and it's about an hour before you can work on top. So, you know, you're painting away, having a lovely time, you want to put a layer on. The fact that you've got to wait an hour is definitely a downside. The next possibility is using a watercolour ground. So we used a white watercolour ground to prepare our canvas. You could use a transparent watercolour ground. Cover the layer that you want to fix into place and let it dry and then work on top. Schmincke make transparent and Daniel Smith's make transparent. It will look white when you put it on. Need to go careful because you wouldn't want to smudge your work with your watercolour ground. Can you see how it's picked up a bit of colour because I went over it a second time? You need to wash your brush out very quickly so it doesn't set in there. Now we have to wait 24 hours to dry. And if I said that was going to disrupt our work, that really is going to disrupt our work. And the third option is this. It's called Aquafix from Schmincke, and it basically can make your watercolours waterproof. You either mix all your colour with it, in which case it becomes utterly waterproof, or you can add a few drops to your wash and it becomes partially waterproof. When these dry, I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to say one of the downsides of both of those approaches is it's fixed now. So if you get further on and think, oh, I've made a mistake, I want to lighten that or lift some, tough. If you've done both of those, they are fixed. The good thing about with the Schmincke, it's if you don't use too much, it stabilises the wash so that you can still lift it, not as easily as that, more like being on paper, but you can glaze over the top. So let's see whether that's actually true. Just as I did over here, I'm going to use my wet brush, and can you see that I am lifting some colour, but not half as much as that. So say I needed to adjust this, I can, but I'm going to have to work hard. Let's just use our magic eraser. And yes, with the magic eraser, we can adjust it, but with that brush, we couldn't adjust it very easily. So I've really stabilised that wash without making it totally waterproof. Therefore, if I want to glaze over the top, I can do so, and it will not muddy up half as much as the untreated. So it makes it far more like working on paper with watercolour, where you can of course glaze. Now Schmincke even suggests using this on paper, which of course you could do. I don't see that there's any need to, because of decent watercolour paper you can layer to your heart's content. So that is amazing. There is another product called what's it called? Shellac soap, which I have to say I have never used because it's super difficult to get in the UK, but you might live in a part of the world. Lucas is a German company, I believe, so you might live there and be able to get hold of it. And that supposedly works in the same way. There might be another possibility which we could try, which is to very gently brush some Aquafix over our watercolour. Say we'd painted this and we'd forgotten to put Aquafix in. Perhaps we could paint a little over the top. Can you see it's picked up a bit of that blue? And maybe we could work over that so it would be a bit like this fixative. Let's see. So we'll come back to those when that's dry and that's dry and just check out how they work. But I think that adding the Schmincke Aquafix or indeed the Lucas has so many advantages. I wouldn't ever bother to do those again. The only disadvantage that I can see of using Aquafix is that you've got to remember to put it in. Let's look a little bit more closely at how we would use Aquafix. First of all, you need to shake it before you use it. So I've got a bit of grey, I think it's just a transparent grey in this. I've already mixed it up to a milky consistency. Let's say if I used pure Aquafix to mix my paint, one, it would be totally waterproof, and it would also get through this little bottle very quickly. So in about that quantity, I would say about 4 drops. So I am putting 1, 2, 3, 4. I need a new syringe. Shall we put 1 for luck? You could use a syringe or a little pipette just to put drops in. I wouldn't pour it because you'll just end up with far too much. So it makes your watercolour look a little bit milky. Mix it thoroughly and then you're good to paint. It stabilises that wash and you can just paint with it to your heart's content. You can still do wet in wet, all the usual things that we love. It will mix and behave just like any paint on the canvas. So it's incredibly easy to use. On no account, do not be tempted to put it into your pans if you're using pan paints like this, because it will form a waterproof barrier and you won't be able to get any colour off. If it dries on your pans, you're pretty stuck actually. I guess you could sand it off. If you want it totally waterproof, don't use water, only use Aquafix. If you want it just water resistant, use a little. The next thing I would just say as a warning is wash your brushes and your palettes out straight away you've finished. You will not be able to leave your paints in your palette overnight, add more water to reconstitute them the next day like you would usually, because it'll have dried waterproof. On a plastic palette, it does cause a lot of staining. So if I were you, I would use a ceramic palette if you're using Aquafix. Everything's dried by now, and I think you can see straight away where I've layered over that the layering over nothing has mucked things up a bit, whereas where I've used the Aquafix, it's layered nicely and we've still got lots of transparency. Interestingly, here I brushed over the Aquafix and there's a real shine to it. So let's see how paint will go over that shiny position, or whether it will. Oh, it's really repelled. So actually just putting a solid layer over the top isn't a great idea. So let's have a look at that workable fixative as well. If I just wiggle that around, I don't know if you can see, it's got a real shine to it. So I'm not hopeful of this. So the downside was that it needs an hour to actually dry. And also, I don't know if you can see, I managed to spray right round the patch, not just the paint. So say there was a small area you needed to fix, it's not overly accurate. Now, no, that's no good at all. It's just repelling the watercolour. Maybe if you put an incredibly fine layer on, but I don't see how you'd do that. So a workable fixative, even if it's a waterproof workable fixative, the problem is it's going to repel your watercolours. I'm very hopeful of the transparent ground because of course that's what it's designed to do. So yeah, look, as we suspected, you can just paint over the transparent ground, and it is transparent. It went on milky, but it's dried see-through. But as I think I mentioned before, the big downside is if we suddenly thought, oh, I want to correct the blue layer, even with our magic eraser, I can't lift any colour at all. It's sealed. So you'd have to be very sure that you haven't made any mistakes. And we've already seen the Aquafix. So if you're having problems layering, the way to go has to be Aquafix, but you must remember to actually put it in your washes because adding it afterwards isn't great. If you've got a relatively small area or considerably more patience than me, and you're pretty sure that there are no corrections to be done, then watercolour ground certainly can work, but you've got that 24-hour drying period. For the greatest versatility, Aquafix all the way.